All right, welcome everyone to Musicians for Musicians presents Music is Essential, a Zoom roundtable discussion among the MFM members. And we're speaking today on composing careers, navigating opportunities in the modern music landscape. And so we have our panelists today are from a variety of different backgrounds with the term composer. So we're kind of going to share our experiences of navigating the world of music and making a living writing music. So for those of you that are new to our organization, Musicians for Musicians, and who I am, I'm Adam Reifsteck. I'm on the board of Musicians for Musicians. I'm also the vice president of the board. And Musicians for Musicians is a not-for-profit advocacy organization that seeks to bring together musicians from all disciplines, styles, traditions, and localities in their cause of mutual self-betterment. Whether through education, networking, or political action, MFM's ultimate goal is to elevate the work of all musicians to the level of a true profession. And we post several different webinars on a variety of different topics, such as world music, doing it from a perspective of actually the craft of music. And then we covered some business aspects of being musicians through these Zoom webinars. We started them in during the pandemic, and then it sort of stuck. We were doing in-person events, and hopefully in the future we'll be doing some more in-person networking events. So stay tuned for that. But this is the first that we've kind of delved in the world of the career of being a composer. So we're super excited to have our panelists today. Today we have Roger Blanc, who's a guitarist and composer, and he's worked extensively in a variety of different roles, from the contemporary classical community to writing music for The Tonight Show and Saturday Night Live and David Letterman. Peter Wetzler is here. He's an award-winning composer and music director. He's also scored a film for film, theater, and dance. So he's going to take more of a perspective of theater and dance. And then we have Austin-born and Brooklyn-based composer Christopher North, who's primarily doing work in the film work, and he's done a lot of different projects and has several composer credits. And one of his latest projects, which he did shared a webinar a while back, a few months ago, I think, on his score for Max Roach, The Drum Also Waltzes. So that was a pretty cool event. If you become a member, you'll have access to all of our webinars, and you can check out some of our previous events. And Christopher shared his knowledge about the film work there, but we'll get into it a little bit today. And then we have Keith Levinson, who's has run the gambit from Broadway to scoring and arranging for the Who, and he's directed the regional tour for that, and for Tommy, and so that was one of his claim to fames there. And then we have Joe Carroll, who's taking the perspective of the songwriter. He's written songs for the likes of Jim Henson and Sesame Street, and has some spots in the advertising world, such as Toyota, Wendy's, Wrangler, General Mills, among others. So we're super excited. And with that, after that introduction, I'll turn it over to Roger, who's going to kind of kick things off with what it means to be a composer, and then where do we go from there?
One more thing.
And Sohrab, for those of you that don't know, is the president of Musicians for Musicians.
And I represent the improvisers who can't score, who don't write, they compose in the moment. So this is also very important. The other thing is that some of our members are also members of other organizations, like the RMA, Local 822, MWA, and the Recording Academy. So thank you for coming, for joining, and let's go, Roger.
Okay. So I'm going to basically read from prepared remarks, because I'm attempting to address the whole concept of the composer as it's existed over time and in different places. And I'm going to get in enough trouble with the prepared remarks. If I go off script, I could really get in trouble. So uh, this webinar was originally going to deal with a much narrower topical approach to the word composer. And I'm going to begin tonight's discussion with a brief look at the word itself and its associations.
Check.
Check. Okay. Disclaimer. I am not an official musicologist or historian, and my knowledge is largely guided by my interest and my experience. I have no doubt that much of what I am about to say will be deemed controversial, inaccurate, or incomplete, all of which will probably be true. Nonetheless, I'm trying my limited way to address the general topic of composer as we have come to know and understand it. So here we go. I suspect that the word composer first brings to mind what we call classical music, and names like Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart. These composers are representatives of what's often called Western music, a broad term encompassing music going back as far as ancient Greece. Scales we reference in music theory today include names such as Dorian and Mixolydian, nomenclature carried over from ancient Greek musical terminology. Passing through ancient Rome and into the so-called Dark Ages in the West, these scales became the basis of the so-called church modes, which in turn are the basis of Gregorian chant, a music comprised solely of sung melodic unisons. With the end of the Dark Ages, the first composers show up in the 1300s in Europe and begin to experiment with polyphony, music comprised of two or more independent melodic parts. Gregorian chant remained involved in much of their work, often comprising one melody within a larger polyphonic texture, and this music was performed primarily by vocalists in connection with activities of the Christian Church. Those of us accustomed to thinking in chords should note that even though polyphonic music formed vertical sonorities, the actual concept of chords wasn't formally recognized for almost another 400 years. With the arrival of Bach and his contemporaries, which more or less coincided with the concept of chords as we understand them, that the music of most people think of as classical began. From approximately 1700 to approximately 1900, music composed in accordance with what's called common practice was written by composers now referred to as masters, much of it instrumental as opposed to vocal, and much of it abstract of any religious or narrative content. These composers' names extend from Bach to Mahler and move politically through the disintegration of European monarchy and into the era of parliamentary democracy. As music moves out of the 18th and into the 19th century, the notion of increased freedom associated with democracy is reflected in longer works played by larger groups, a trend well personified in Mahler's symphonies and Wagner's operas in the later 1800s. I would actually like to go off script and just mention that in some ways, the most fascinating thing about Beethoven, as opposed to the guys before him or after him, is that he embodied both the discipline of the monarchical era music and the anticipated freedom of the parliamentary democracy era music. So he's kind of uniquely expressive and organized both at the same time. Okay, so beginning around 1900, America moves into the role of new global leader. America has no history of kings or popes and operates internally as a free market capitalist economy. The result of these historical coincidences is the rise of an indigenous American music built primarily around popular song and conceived with the intent to sell to the largest number of purchasers. As this takes place in America, Europe first produces Stravinsky's Rite of Spring and other concert works which differ markedly from past practice. But shortly thereafter, it moves into World War I, then World War II, after which the transfer of power to Europe to the transfer of power from Europe to America is more or less complete, with a number of prominent European composers relocating to America, often to university teaching jobs here. Meanwhile, America maintains the European concert hall tradition of classical music performance, but largely by simply replaying the established European repertoire of the previous 2 centuries. This is the tradition which is taught to instrumental students in musical education establishments, while would-be composers are trained in an activity that really is no longer of primary importance to the concert world. Such students will most likely go on to teach school. The result of all this is a word composer, which we all know well, but one without a single clear personification in contemporary society. Film composers play an important role in their medium, but are underappreciated despite often being well compensated. Composers for theater and dance have contributed significantly to those arts, but are usually less appreciated than their work might deserve. Song composers have been dominant players in 20th century musical life, but their activity bears little resemblance to that of classical composers. Irving Berlin, perhaps the most successful songwriter we can name, possessed very little technical musical knowledge himself. Arrangers and orchestrators have tremendous craft and add tremendous value, but most remain largely anonymous to the public mind. We will hear tonight from individuals with careers in all four of the above areas, but first I'm going to turn this thing over to Adam Reifsteck, who, despite having a music school training in composition, has moved into the area of producing electronic-based dance and techno music, and I'll leave it to him to define those terms or any others he'd prefer to use. We will then hear from each of the other participants after Adam is done, and hopefully have time for some general discussion and Q&A at the end. So, Adam, the floor is yours.
Cool. Thanks, Roger. So yeah, I've been running a record label for, it's crazy to believe we're celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. So I started a record label for electronic music back in 2015. And prior to that, many of you on this call, I sort of have the university education, trained classical, went through school with an undergrad bachelor's in music. And when I know going into my musical training, like growing up, I started university in 2003. So this was already kind of the turn of the 21st century where things were starting to change. So I was kind of, instead of going going the traditional route as the composer and going on to teaching then at a university, studying music theory. I did all that, but in addition to that, I was taking on the recording end of things. I had an interest in recording as well. So I went to Duquesne University. So I was in a fortunate position to have a solid education in both the behind the recording glass and then in front of the recording glass, so to speak. So behind, learning the recording aspect of things, and then unfortunately going into graduating, what do you do after that? Do you go work for a studio? What do you do after that? It's kind of hard to sort of navigate through things. And as things were changing and the music industry was kind of up in a different trajectory with the release of iTunes and kind of upending how things were done and everything going to digital. So I kind of went back then to university and decided to get my master's in composition and seeing what that could be. And then after graduating, I came to New York and fully intended to break into the contemporary classical music scene. And I was doing that for a while and writing for chamber ensembles and getting commissions, writing for that and some grants from the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council and whatnot. But then I was realizing that, I wanted to kind of still do kind of the electronic and the recording aspect that I started with in my undergrad. So I was trying to find a way to bridge the gap. And so I was doing a little bit of my own production work in electronic music and, writing more specifically like in what's called the intelligent dance music or IDM. So my music was a little bit more advanced than kind of your traditional techno house sort of realm. And so I was shopping to labels and my music to labels and trying to get signed and getting my work out there. And I was finding a lot of friction because in the dance music world, you had in the way the labels work is that you have to be writing specifically that a certain style, and you have to be in that sort of cookie cutter, for the floor, 8 bar, 16 bar loops and stuff like that. So you can't really break out of that mold if you want to get signed by the big heavyweights in that electronic dance music community. So I didn't really fit that mold, and I was finding a lot of artists that I was running in circles with in the clubs and in New York that were kind of doing sort of a little bit more adventurous with their work. So I decided, hey, if labels aren't going to sign us, why don't I start my own label and start promoting this type of music? So I fell into the more of the label owner role, and that's what I've been doing for the past 10 years and trying to getting our artists out there and exposure beyond just my own music. And so it's kind of interesting, sort of how I started as a classical composer, and then sort of went into the electronic music by sort of opportunity. And I think one of the things that I've found early on in going into this is that you know, part of a successful career as a quote unquote composer today is really the composer is an antiquated term. I feel it's more of now you're a music entrepreneur where you're kind of creating your own opportunities, and you can find yourself in a variety of different aspects of the industry and really finding where you excel at. And I was really good at pulling together artists of different styles and wanted to showcase their work through my label. So that's kind of where I ended up. And I still do contemporary classical music on the side as well. So I still do some work as a quote unquote composer in the traditional sense, but most of my work is in the electronic music world. So yeah, so with that, I'll kind of turn it over to Christopher North, who kind of went the direction of the film composing.
Thanks so much, Adam. Really great to be here and really proud to be a part of this organization and having given chats before and look forward to more. As kind of covered, Austin-born, Brooklyn-based composer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, conductor, and even one of those professor type people that tries to contribute to what young people are learning to varying degrees, especially during challenging times. I think I'm a little bit more aware of that last part of it based on just what's going on in the world, and yet how important this art is, how important music is, how important storytelling is, and I think as I was hearing Adam talk about the way that all of our other panelists tonight are glued together by what we're doing, what Roger described as terms of composer, and yet for what we know about historically, someone like Bach and Bach was doing on a daily basis with his teaching or instrument fixing and all those things. In some ways, my life in New York City doing what I'm doing now is not entirely different than what it was in Dallas when I was also making a living with music and collaborating with dance. I just didn't know any film people. So one of the only ways to be a film composer is to know a lot of filmmakers. And yet there's a lot of ways that dance can happen, whether that's knowing writer directors, knowing actors, knowing music editors, knowing knowing editors, knowing music supervisors. And those are the ways that at least that can start to happen. I think my one of the topics I was talking about earlier today was my DBA for my publishing company, which is Boy from Texas Tunes. So I'm Boy from Texas Tunes, and I wear that with a badge of pride, in the sense that that's part of me that I'm more in touch with. So despite degrees, despite being a professor, I'm actually I'm most comfortable and most feel myself when I am noodling on a piano or making stuff up, and in some cases, really leaning into the part of me that was always self-taught and that is self-taught and still learning in that kind of a way. And that to me also connects with improvising and storytelling and sound. And if I was to sum up my whole thing that would be, a storyteller in sound, whether that's in song or score or otherwise. And yet, to acknowledge what I've had some more success with more recently, that would of course be some documentary films, which is a different kind of a task, and also even some narrative films, particularly some short, more dramatic films, as well as even horror films. And so I truly enjoy the chameleon-like aspect of that. And yet I'm very aware of how much, left to my own devices, how much personality I can have. So part of this is being very aware, if I'm 100% me, what's it going to do? And how successful that me may be in terms of my own projects, but also in terms of what a film needs. And even circling back to what happened even in the Max Roach film, I was very clear that there was times where I needed to dial my own part of my personality down, and what kinds of parts of my jazz expression was more monk when it actually needed to be more what Max Roach was doing. That's just one example of kind of knowing oneself pretty well and the aesthetics of what one likes to do, and that have something to say and a point of view. And as I think about, young folks these days, and even what's about ready to happen with the further onslaught of all the AI film, music coming and everything coming, is that this music, this art towards the edges that has more of that uniqueness is actually going to be the thing that's going to probably be a greater measure of certain success and about what's about ready to happen. And I feel that. In other words, no offense to my film composers that love four-chord sample library based music, but watch out, it's coming. All of that's coming, and if it's been done before, AI may find a way to do some of that better than it's been done before. But if I lean into the parts of me that was my own production style, my own instrumental style, what kinds of performances I like, which edits I like to take, and that generally lean into humanness, then we still have a little bit less to worry about for the time being, and um and uh and so that has to do with the where I take the different backgrounds of the things we've already talked about that I also have in common with my other folks here, and so that's the part of me that just loves telling a story, writing a good tune. And if I discover some sound that is super unique, that says more than even what notes can say, so sometimes it's about a singular sound that does a certain thing. And that's often what my process uh, involves, is in sketching, I'm always looking at sounds or themes. And generally, that approach means that I'm getting the production of whatever the score is going to land, it will actually land on time. Because ultimately, that's what I'm responsible for. Composing for film, you're responsible for not just the notes, but how those notes are produced and how those notes are produced in sync to the actual picture. And in a world where the edit can be changed to the last minute, that also means that you need to be super, super flexible with what the heck that is. And yet some of that can involve play and inspiration and last minute decisions and improv. And that's the thing too, where I'm aware of all these different hats that I wear. Sometimes I'll take a music editing approach to material that I've already done and fashion a new cue out of stems that maybe have had no business being together, but all of a sudden, because the whole thing was made from the same cloth, there's some kind of synergy that happens. But you know what? That's actually what that cue needs, is that little bit of putting together a little bit of a mashup of two things that may not have intended together, but it's a creative solution that actually lands right. So I know I've spoken for a decent amount of time. I think the other thing that I wanted to at least make sure that I hit on is in terms of what I think has helped some of the success that I've had is also this notion of being multimodal. So I think it's interesting to think about multi-hyphenate. I mean, come on, all these people that are multi-hyphenate. I mean, and yet in my day-to-day experience, that's what I feel. And I'm also daily in touch, try to be daily in touch with my own aesthetic. That means that it gets out in the way it needs to, such that I can be a more meaningful collaborator. Such that there are times where I love being a leader. I led a small orchestra and a piece of mine at Carnegie Hall, made a Carnegie Hall conducting debut, Carnegie Hall world premiere of a piece. This is November of 23. And that's great. And I also like being a part of a team where I've got to find my way, and yet sometimes you're feeling more of a function, sometimes you're more about the art, sometimes it's somewhere in the middle, and then most of the times it's creative solutions to problems and things that have to happen on a deadline. Either way, something's got to get in by this date, and let's chase it till we get it. And that's the part that I love about it, and that's the part that still involves a day-to-day connection with my own humility of what I'm capable of or not capable of, and yet the optimism of actually being surprised by what I may come up with when the clock's a ticking. And in some cases, I've landed, and so other cases, you at least got it done and got it in on time, which is all the other things. So I think that, yeah, that was the main chunk of what I was going to say. Having done music for theater and dance, I can also speak to how that influenced my process, and that was the bulk of the writing that I did was in my 20s was for dance. It was also really great to hang out with a lot of dancers. It's always a wonderful thing. So that is another whole wonderful thing. And with that, I will turn over to Peter. So there we go.
Great. Yeah. Well, I was really pleasantly surprised. And Christopher, I didn't know you started out in dance, so we share that. And I was surprised that Roger decided me to speak about composing for theater and dance, because that's actually where I began my career making a living as a composer. And that was back in 1976. And I had gotten turned on to modern dance and postmodern dance at Princeton, where I was allegedly studying composition with Milton Babbitt. And as a classically trained pianist, I'd already soloed with symphonies, and I wasn't feeling particularly nourished by my composition studies with Babbitt. But in the practice rooms, I'd stumbled upon polyrhythms, and I was just noodling around and just really into it. I didn't know what it was. I'd never heard, when I first heard Steve Reich and Phil Glass and Terry Riley and that whole minimalist thing, it was like I found my people. So I felt like I found a connection there. But I loved the role of the dance accompanist in the dance classes that I was taking. I was studying, Lamone and Graham and all these different techniques, and the accompanist was there, kind of just riffing, playing. There's this incredible connection between movement and sound and music. They both use time. They both explore rhythm and they have similar elements that they're working with either in movement or in sound. And I was really attracted to that. I also attracted because I was at Princeton, where there was this hidebound thinking that classical music was great music and everything else was just kind of borrowing from crap. The role of music in dance was unjudgmental. It was like, if this might work, jazz might work for this, world music might work for that, classical might work for that, pre-classical, whatever. So I love that. So I when I got out of Princeton, I went right to downtown New York and started playing music for postmodern dance classes and pedaled around New York. And the thing is, my rent was $199 a month in my basement apartment, so I didn't need to earn very much. And so I was really happy, really proud of the fact that I hadn't sold out. I was just doing, avant-garde music. And this was in the early days when synthesizers this is when it began, there weren't any synthesizers. I was just using whatever music, whatever instruments were available, if it was my piano or prepared piano, and then I had a TAC 4-track. A lot of people will track with this, following this before nonlinear, before digital. So we kind of grew up. Many of us grew up with all this technology, and it was a really exciting time to get started. But the important thing, because this is one of the reasons why I'm a member of MFM, is that when I met my wife in Toronto, I brought her back to New York, and she watched me working on a 20-minute dance piece that I was getting paid $100 for. And she said, I wouldn't sign a napkin for $100. How are we going to ever have, at that point we were engaged. She said, how are you going to have a family? You're working for choreographers with the lowest paid artists in the totem pole, and you're working for them. So that was kind of like, well, my passion is that relationship between sound and movement. I could just as easily do it in the screen. Fast forward, I moved to Toronto, did a concert at a place that's kind of like the knitting factory of Toronto called the Music Gallery, invited all these film producers. And I got lucky. You know, I ended up getting a feature film, and I, segued into music for film and TV. And the thing is, what I noticed when I got into that world and I was getting paid well was the royalty system. Somebody before me, at the outset of the technology of film, radio, and television, was there to say, hey, if you're using music, you need to pay the composer. And the royalty system was, when I got my first royalty check, I was blown away. And I thought, later on, as digital came along, it's kind of like, and this is one of the reasons why MFM is so important, why I got on the board of MFM, is that we weren't there. My generation failed when digital came along to say, hey, the composer, the performer needs to be well paid. And going back to Roger's introduction, one of the things that Beethoven, they have a Beethoven quote on a document that I actually downloaded. This was in 1978 or 80. Meet the Composer had a document that spelled out, instrumentation for solo pieces, for concert, for jazz, opera, theater, dance, and it had rates for like middle of the road to, well paid. And these were rates back in the 80s. So when someone would come to me, and people can still, it's called commissioning music, and it's you can still get it, it's online. And this is like from the 80s. So if someone comes to you and says, oh, we're doing a theater piece and it's an hour and a half long, this is our money. And I say, well, this is what was middle of the road 40 years ago. This is the fee. So there was actually something written down. And in the introduction of the Meet the Composer, this article called Commissioning Music, and I'll put a link to it after I finish talking in the chat, so you guys can download it if you want to look at it if you're not familiar with it. But in the introduction is this wonderful quote from Beethoven that I'll never forget. It says, "Rest assured, you're dealing with a true artist who, like all great artists, expects to be well paid for their work." And that's kind of the thing we want to carry forward with MFM. And I think, I don't want to, I'm trying to think of other things I wanted to bring up. Oh, well, just the other thing was that, for me, the epiphany, which sounds similar to what I've heard from other people as well. My epiphany was after working in film and TV, I started getting series work, and I would get a TV series, and I would work my ass off. Then after and make enough money that I could like coast for a bit and start working on creative projects, personal projects, my own CDs and that kind of thing. And then the epiphany came right at the time that the union was the Teamsters were helping the union, the Hollywood composers to unionize. And as part of that commission, they commissioned a study that looked at our rates over the last 20 years and compared that with the Writers Guild. So the Writers Guild over 20 years, their rates had kind of stayed a little bit maybe less than cost of living over 20 years. When I looked at the rates that they found for composers like myself, our rates had gone down 66%. And I had just finished a TV series, and that's usually the time that I could take a break. And I looked at my bank account, and I didn't have the mortgage for the next month. And I was like, I've been like a chicken or an ostrich in the sand. I always kept thinking, well, I'm not making as much money, but so I got to get more efficient. I can do this more. I can get up earlier. I can, so it was like my career over the last 20 years was like getting more efficient. It wasn't, but not getting paid because we don't have representation. So that's just the thing I want to throw in the pie is that it's really important that we don't sell ourselves short, that the younger composers don't fall for the hook, line, and sinker for the, we don't have this. This is the best one in our business. It's like, we don't have any money for this much, but we're going to get some money down at price. If you can do this for less, we'll be able to pay you the full rate the next time. Don't do that ever. And I'll leave it at that. And
Yeah, and I'll get real for a real quick minute. So that's kind of why I sort of left the classical world, because what you brought up, like kind of why I was forced to create my own opportunities, is like that didn't happen, so I have to go in another direction. But we'll kind of talk about that a little later. But yeah. So with that, I guess you want to turn it over to Joe Carroll, our resident songwriter here. Joe, you're muted.
He's in the airport. He's got to wait
Yeah.
for it to land.
But as you'll see throughout this, we kind of have our own specialties. We kind of been forced, we have a whole bunch of different interests, as I'm sure you all have as a composer. But we sort of find, as a career in music, you kind of get thrust into a certain area. And Joe, going into as a songwriter. So if you want to speak a little bit about that, Joe, it'd be great.
I was not thrust. I
Yeah.
don't think I was thrust.
Yeah, probably the wrong term, I guess.
Yeah. You could, if you want to say thrust, it's okay. So is the audio okay? I'm sitting at a gate in an airport, and God knows what announcements are going to come and interrupt it. So I'm a little bit technically challenged. So yeah, I mean, my thing is a bit different, I guess. Or I mean, all of our things are a bit different. Mine is a little bit unique in a way, I guess, because I spent a lot of time writing songs and writing lyrics. So a lot of my kind of interest in music is about the how poetry and how lyrics match up with melody. I'd be happy to talk more about that. The background thing, I don't want to spend too much time on that because we're going to spend the whole time. Everyone's going to be, running down their resumes. I was born in the music business. My father was a band leader. I had really good exposure to the New York music scene growing up. My mother was a booking agent. I by the time I was 12 years old, I thought I knew everything about the music business, and I was playing gigs and shit like that. So I spent a lot of time writing commercials, writing jingles. I've had a fairly good mix of doing scoring, as well as being able to write songs, which is a little bit, as you'll find out, hard to do because everybody mostly wants you to either be a song guy or an underscore guy. So that was kind of pleasant. The best part of my career by far was the 10 to 15, depending on your count, years that I worked almost exclusively for the Jim Henson organization, writing stuff with the Muppets. And the part of that was good, the part that was unique about it was they were at the time exempt from the sort of production structure that has been described by previous people on this call. It sort of worked like you were a member of a tribe and you were insulated from the rest of the universe by being in the tribe. So that was extremely satisfying. We had a lot of autonomy as a group, as our production group had a lot of autonomy. And we had, thanks to Jim Henson, we had a lot of power to push back on stuff. So we were able to do really fun stuff. It was a very non-vertical organization. Everyone talked to everyone in the production chain. It was not a top-down structure the way most films are made. And it actually ruined me for the rest of my career because when that organization sort of disintegrated in the early 2000s, and I spent some time working for other companies and writing TV shows, and I was sort of like, I feel like there might not be anything as good as that coming up again. So I could talk more about that. What I do now is I work with a lot of nonprofit groups about sort of promoting creativity in music, public music. I spend a lot of time working on a project that's called Make Music Day. That's one day a year that we produce free music events all over the world. So I'm not like in the weeds of getting gigs and trying to pitch stuff the way some of the rest of the composers on this call are. So maybe my perspective is a little different. Somebody texted me earlier today and said, "Who is the hands down top shelf, no questions, badass music producer in New York?" And I didn't have an answer to that. And what that person meant was, who's the equivalent of Quincy Jones? And I don't think, is there a person? This is a question. I wanted to hear what other people say. I have my answer, but I don't. I'll be curious to see what other people think about that. I'm sorry, that wasn't a rhetorical question. That was an actual question. I'm hoping someone will jump in and say something.
Yeah, I know for me, for being a quote unquote producer and label owner, I feel like the Quincy Jones of the world, that's a thing that has of the past. So I think there's in the sense that I feel like there's a whole lot of specialization. So if you say producer, what genre are they looking for? Because I feel like the producers these days that are like they're specialized, right? They're known for a specific thing, as opposed to somebody like Quincy that did all the things, right? So that's my perspective, I guess.
Well, that's what this guy meant. Is there somebody? Certainly in the film business, we could all name a handful of people that we think are the badass kings of Hollywood in the film business, and probably in the film scoring business and everything else. But I don't know. Anyone else have any thoughts about that? Is there somebody that's like that stands out, that's above everybody else?
Well, one thing that's interesting, if you go all the way back to Madonna entering the 90s, she had with her album True Blue in the mid 80s, she had Patrick Leonard and Steve Bray produce and co-write almost everything on that album, and it was huge. But as she went into the 90s and you had Vogue and other more dance techno-oriented music, she would bring in a guy, do an album and a half with him, then throw him away and get another one. Someone's not muted. Oh, that's you. Got it. So it's almost like she started a trend of kind of cash and carry production. And so, in terms of who's the greatest now, whoever produced Taylor Swift's last album or maybe Lady Gaga's, but they'll only be great as long as it takes for that to be replaced by the next guy.
Yeah, I think that's what I was getting at kind of as well. So there's like somebody hot for the minute, and then it's on to the next.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting observation, especially since in filmmaking, that hasn't changed. There's still giants that dominate things, and that we all probably could agree on who the top people are, whether the criteria is creative or financial. But it doesn't seem like it's the same. Like you said, it's all niche people, and it's all you put 10 songs on a record with 10 different producers.
Yeah,
I don't know. I thought it was an interesting observation. What's some other stuff I could say that's different from what else we're talking about? My process for most of my career has been a bit different than what a lot of us have been talking about on this call. Because if you write a song for a movie or a TV show, you're usually on the bus before they start filming. So that kind of gives you a different set of perspectives about how you interact with the team. Sometimes, like in my Muppet experience, sometimes I'd be able to offer ideas about music and songs before the script was written. They just hang on. I think there's a bulletin about a flight coming in. Stand by. Sorry about that. So that's a bit different. I also skip. Sorry. I'm just gonna mute this for a second, I guess. Is it horribly annoying on your end, the background chatter?
Yeah, it's not too bad.
Okay, good. So I'll just keep going. So in terms of a job and how you want to position your career, that's quite different because it has a tremendous advantage because you get to interact with the filmmakers and the TV people before the pie has been baked. And several times I had experiences where my interaction changed their interaction. somebody would send me, and of course, this is a little bit unique because I was working with the Muppets a lot, and you know, we had a different set of opportunities because we're doing puppets and animation and computer graphics. But sometimes I would start a project with somebody calling randomly, saying, I'm working on a drawing for a character that's going to be in a something, and I think the guy's going to sing a song somewhere in the thing, whatever it was. And then that would be a conversation that would then end up with, oh, well, what's the guy look like? Send me a line drawing of what you think the guy looks like today, what the character looks like. And then you can kind of go back and forth and say, well, maybe if he had a giant mouth, he could be a bass singer, or, and you start to have a two-way interaction about something musical versus something visual. And I've talked to an awful lot of people in film and television, and that's a little bit of a unique thing. And I've had a lot of stuff like that where I've been involved early because it's a song, and the ideas about the song influence the ideas about the film, and it's sort of a reverse process sometimes. So I can talk some more about that. Or we could ask questions because I don't really have too much else to say.
Yeah, I want to make sure we get Keith's perspective as well, because we have another perspective of taking on the role of being.
Just one real quick.
Oh, I'm sorry, Keith. I thought I was batting cleanup. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm in Vegas. We have no culture. So
yeah. Well, what perspective?
There's no composing.
Yeah, the orchestration, arranging kind of side of things was where we're going next, as another.
Well, let me just get one thing in with Joe, which is Joe. Without naming an address, Joe lives in a building that used to be the ASCAP building, which meant that picking up his checks was not a great hardship. Songwriters have a unique position financially relative to a lot of other people that participate as composers in the American economy. Is there anything you'd like to say about the benefits or advantages of being a songwriter versus being one of us other people?
Well, no one has figured out a way to intrude on that quite as effectively as big business has in all the other areas of music. So it's a little bit, I wouldn't say it's sacrosanct, because there has been shifts in the way royalties get paid, and like everything else, it hasn't been to the upside, it's been to the downside. But generally, it hasn't had as much a negative impact as some other areas. So in that sense, yeah, and also a lot of the stuff, as a separate idea, a lot of the stuff that I have worked on has a lot of longevity, happily, because it's attached to a kid's project, and it gets recycled, and it pops up again several years later because it gets re-released. And so in terms of sort of picking where you want to end up, that has some unique advantages.
Thank you. And Keith, the floor is yours.
I don't need much floor. I did the whole piano lesson thing through Juilliard, and then the family moved to London. But my background really started entirely in the theater and theater music. Got lucky and wrote a show when I was really young, and then had to make money in the business. So I started writing other composers' shows for them, which was somewhat lucrative for me for a while, because some of them were pretty famous theater composers. But we're also going back to an age of Hal Prince and Stephen Sondheim, who are kind of God. And I think the reason that I wound up in theater was not so much different than Henson. It was really a collaboration then. You're with a team of people, theoretically all trying to reach the same goal with the same time restriction, and made some very deep and lasting relationships with that, um, which continues to some degree today. But I think the need for the orchestrator arranger um, is kind of disappearing between AI and the fact that everybody can do it in their bedroom. Um, uh, it's now a much tougher job to get. And so now, like years and years later, I'm finally going back to composing because I realize that what I've been doing for the last 45 years is other people's work. And that's been quite an eye opener in the last 6 to 9 months. Taking the time to really work on what I once studied. And it's slow to coming back, but it's coming back. I also don't live in New York anymore, so I don't have quite the overhead that I did in New York. And much cheaper in Vegas, though there's no live music here. So it's sort of six of one, half a dozen another. But that's and again, as everybody else has said, the monetization. If there's a scale, I don't know what it is anymore, and I certainly don't know if there's a scale who pays that anymore. I still believe if you'll do this for $100, this 3-hour film for $100 now, we'll get you on the back end. My least two favorite words. But yeah, I think the same boat in terms of money and what we charge for it that is fair and decent, and then how we collect it. Back to somebody else.
Cool. Yeah, so I guess maybe we want to shift gears in terms of the actual income that you are generating for the panelists, because we had a question pop in the chat. If we could maybe go into the nitty gritty of like how you actually making a living with music, and I know for what your income streams and kind of what does that, how does that kind of maybe monthly or an annual thing, like how do you kind of make it all work so to speak. So maybe yeah, anybody that wants to jump in, or maybe Christopher, or want to jump in.
I'm going to just jump in real quick with the notion that pretty much from top to bottom, this business is not one that distributes rewards fairly. It tends to concentrate rewards in a limited number of hands. So going into it, unless you are amazingly well connected, amazingly talented, or amazingly lucky, or any connection of the three, you have to realize you're entering a difficult area. And one of the reasons I bothered Joe with my question is that in work I've done for a few very successful songwriters, I've been amazed at how well they lived from a financial perspective. And I've also seen this true of a few very major producers when the record business was doing major producers. And so even in classical music, where there's maybe not a ton of money, you do see certain people sort of walking from day to day from award to other award. I'm thinking of Tanya Leone here, who I see Facebook posts pretty much every other day receiving some honor or award. And so for every starving kid, in Milwaukee teaching Theory 101 and about to get axed before they get their tenure, you have a person like her who's doing very, very, very well. And so the answer to how does the money work there is it doesn't work very fairly. And where you land in that matrix of success to less success is going to be, as I say, it's going to be a matter of luck, talent, and connections as to how it plays out for you. That's
True.
my
Yeah.
2 cents for now. Anyone else want to jump in with some?
Well, I have a question to ask, which is, how does anybody else here handle the actual nuts and bolts of agreeing to a payment and then actually being able to collect that?
That all depends on timing of deliverables, you know. So one of the things that can happen, at least with the way that films are being made, particularly docs are being made now, is you may start a process with a deal memo, with the payout of first check to start, maybe second check somewhere in the middle, and then the third check upon deliver of all the things, usually an all-in type fee. And so the only thing you have, power you have in your playbook, is the fact that if they've got a deadline for on their end, they want you to start sooner than later, and then you've got when you deliver it. And yet you have to really hold the fact that you're delivering music for approval, and those may be reference tracks, they may already be in the Avid, but at least something has to hold out till there's intentionality of the and making good on the agreement, you know. And generally, folks of a certain, there can still be things that are out of people's control and other things, but generally, that's the only thing that you've got to do. And just the natural human inclination that as you're both invested, you're both invested, you know, and that's just a natural human being thing of like, we're both invested in this. And that yes, you know, I've got a whole book called Torn Music, which is a whole book on rejected scores, you know. And yeah, you're always the last one that can be rejected, but part of that may also mean that in some films, regardless of what happened there, I'm going to own the composition. I may own the masters depending on who paid for the recording session, and then you get reuse things, which is something we touched on before this whole chat started, which is the notion of, you know, does it make any sense for a film to own it forever? They just need the sync license for the thing, you know. They need the sync license for the composition and this master to go with that film forever. Okay, great. But you actually need to own the song, you know. Do you actually need to own the score? Do you actually need to own the recording? And that's an interesting thing of at least a notion of a clawback, so that I always have a way to the rights reversion goes back to me at some point. So that may have muddied the waters for the conversation, but basically, no, there's not final delivery till there's a final check in hand, you know, and that's, you know, I'm wishing there was kind of like an escrow service of
Yeah.
but generally that's holding that out's the only way to do that, you know.
Chris, are you negotiating your own terms, or do you have an intermediary helping you with that?
I have a person that helps out, and I've had some flirtations with some other manager people that as the deals sometimes get bigger, I reach out to them. But one person that's been doing a little bit more of reading over contracts, and at least if I need a third party to facilitate some of that conversation, I do. So, but you know that it's interesting to think about which kinds of folks like that bring work versus which folks like that help. Just it just helps to have a third person talk about it. That's the main thing.
No, there was I worked on a fairly good number of feature films with name producers attached to them for a period of time, and in one case, a famous film composer who shall remain nameless had as a visitor in the studio one of his nephews. And his nephew was doing, I think, a master's at an Ivy college on the subject of film scoring. And he had with him, just as it happened, he had a copy of the contract under which his uncle was doing the particular job we were involved in. And I'm telling you, this thing was probably that thick. It was like a small Manhattan White Pages. So when it gets into the higher levels of the game, there are a lot of ifs, ands, and buts in those kind of agreements. So it's valuable information that you're sharing.
Yeah, and I have a pretty, even the template that I've had, it's gone through different iterations, but it's generally met with more favorable. It's probably still a little basic, but it's general. It seems to still be working. And yeah, that at least is. And for example, there's another film I was just working on that I wanted to make sure that it was very clear that I keep all rejected music, and that because that's the other thing too of just rejected music, rejected masters. I mean, they may have owned part of the masters that go to the final film, but the idea is that I can keep those to do other things with them because that just makes no sense to not that I don't get to own the work product. So.
And I'll say you're very pleasant demeanor, and that's probably helpful to you in your negotiations where you're talking turkey, but you're doing so as a friendly face. And I think actually an important thing to keep in mind when it comes to all these matters that you have to maintain a civil and hopefully friendly dialogue with the people you're working with, especially if you're representing yourself where
Yeah.
money is.
Yeah, and it's just a general principle. I mean, I will do everything to make sure there's not a bridge burnt. I mean, there's, and I'm very fortunate that that's kind of been a life that's worked out well for me because, and it continues to, and yet I can probably count, in terms of business or collaboration things where it's clear there was a impasse that was not survivable. I mean, that's maybe less than 5 people in my life, so I always keep the channel open. Hey, this didn't work out, and I even had a situation with a film that should go unnamed last fall where actually last year where I was up for it. I did not get it, but I was the composer that showed up, that I was a supportive friend that showed up at the film festival, and the producer took me aside and said, look, we had to go the way we went because we went, but we're going to work together. And if I had blown my top at any point or been, then no, but this just keeps the conversation going. So that's the most important thing. I'll meet you on the top, meet you on the way up or on the way down. Either way, I'm going to try and be as good of a human being as I can possibly be. So anyway, I'm sure somebody else has something to say about all that.
Well,
One
it
of the,
seems then it's
oh,
tough then to create a union for composers
yeah,
because it sounds the way a composer works and makes business is very individual. And it, it everything depends on, as Roger and Adam really, and also Chris said, networking, as network in terms of to meet the right people. It can be producer, can be agent, can manager, and find some trust between the person who could help. So the same problem we have with local L22 that many musicians, freelance musicians, are unhappy of our union because they say the union doesn't do anything. But principally a union has to make also some business, which is by getting a percentage of a bargaining contract, right? So for composers to bargain looks like impossible. So
right. And that kind of ties into this, like Kevin just popped in the chat as Google saying there's the average salary. There is no salary for a composer because we're freelance. We're not employed by an employer, with the exception of being, in cases of maybe a production company sending you a W-2 as work for hire kind of things. But in the general sense, we're all freelancers. So it's sort of up to us to kind of advocate for ourselves and getting paid. So
Unless you have the Dramatists
yeah,
Guild negotiating for you
yeah, exactly.
and following and actually following through on those contracts.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the only composers. Granted, it's theater composers, but it's the only really. It's not a union; it's a guild. But it's the only group I can really think of off the top of my head that will represent a composer.
And Keith, do they represent the composer uh, in negotiating percentages of gross with theaters during the runs of shows?
Yeah, yes, and there are scales, and there are deliverable time periods and options, and um, the which are all good things. The only downside of the Dramatist Guild is you have to have already been somewhat successful to get in there. You need to have, I forget exactly what the rules are, but you need to have been produced in a regional equity theater, or an off-Broadway house or a Broadway house, um, to be considered. Same thing for a lyricist and a book writer. And you have to prove, you need a program or something to prove it. But yeah, I mean, if you're if you're going to write a real musical, I'm doing one right now, and we're following the guild rules, including collaboration agreements, because that's a whole other kettle of fish when you're writing with somebody, and if you don't have an agreement with them, you're somewhat foolish.
So you're collaborating with a lyricist and a book writer, something like that?
Yeah, or vice versa. I mean, there may be a book writer who's collaborating with me as a composer lyricist, and I've been burned more than once by not having a collaboration agreement, where whatever we're not friends anymore. We in a friendly way decide that somebody isn't right for the project. You want to be protected for the work you've already done. And how do you deal with, and this is what the guild does, how do you deal with the work in the future? The work that if the collaboration falls apart, who gets to keep the idea? I mean, that's a big general statement, but there's a lot of stuff that comes along with that in collaboration.
In essence, that's a created by kind of credit, the latter, the idea part.
Well, I mean, sometimes it's conceived by, and I think it's probably rare that 2 or 3 people sit down and all at the same time go, let's make Anne of Green Gables a musical. But so somebody comes to somebody else with the idea, and you do a year's worth of work on it. You find out that the show's, like most shows, isn't really going to happen. But now who owns what?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Peter Gordon's comment in the chat about keep your copyright if at all possible. And I just noticed that in my career, when I first started out, when I got contracts, the copyright was always mine. And then somewhere along the line, I would get approached, and it was like, well, we're going to pay you a little more, but we want to keep the copyright. And then it went from there to, we don't have any more money, and we're keeping the copyright. And so that was kind of the progress of us not having a union and losing that. I mean, anytime I do anything for A&E or Discover or any of those people, you basically give them your firstborn, and because we have no bargaining. But PBS seemed to be the last holdout of when I get a PBS score, I would have the copyright. But although someone new at PBS has been trying to change that and take some of the publishing. And someone's got, Scott McAllister has his hand up. Adam, do you need to unmute him or something?
Nope, everybody should be able to mute themselves.
I've just been waiting patiently, that's all. So this past September, I had the good fortune of making it to the PMC conference in Los Angeles. I've been working in sync for the last 3 or 4 years, trying to get 90-second Stranger Things drone cues placed, and just whatever is needed for whatever album I think I can reasonably approach. Um, the panel discussion, one of the keynote panels that was there, probably the keynote panel, was about AI, and it's been mentioned a couple of times in this here as well. But I don't think they had enough foresight to what they were really talking about. This, oh, AI is going to be, and there's a plethora of publishers there that all were very poo-poo about the whole AI experience. No, we're not going to use it. We're not going to sign anybody who's using AI. We're not going to do this. Not going to do this. Not going to do this. I thought to myself, yeah, but it's in the water. What are you going to do about this? Here's this thing that is already synthesizing, it's generating music. Now, it's still kind of stilted, it's still kind of generic, it's still soulless, if you want to go that far. Um, but the long and short of it is, I'm closely aligned with some people who feed music to the young and the restless. It's a fairly prolific show when it comes to needing production music. They use a lot of source music because they have a bar and a cafe and a nightclub that they need jukeboxes playing in. So they go through somewhere between 20 and 25 new original songs a week that they still pay for, although be it's very low. Um, but when AI finally gets where it needs to be, what's to stop any major production house, so CBS Records, what's to stop them from saying, you know what, we really like your AI model there. We're going to buy your whole company. And now you are going to work for us. You're going to produce all of our production music. You're going to do our ad promos. You're going to do our logos. You're going to do our all of that. And it's just all going to come out of the AI model. And people at the conference were thinking, oh, well, that's crazy. Why would they do that? They can't make any money off of that. And I'm like, they're not
Yeah.
trying to make money off of that. They're trying to save money of not paying me. Okay. So if you've got a track that's going in on a show that is now at negative 27 dB anyway, because it's background music and it has to be well below the dialogue, what's to prevent any of that? And then the penny dropped for a lot of these publishers. It's like, oh, I see. Wow, that's wild. And I asked them, so what's the plan? And they all sat there looking like deer in headlights. And so I'll ask you guys the same question. What's the plan? I'm curious to know, Peter, when you saw that the fees for composing had gone down 60%, did you think for a second, well, let's extrapolate that line until it hits zero, or at least an unlivable wage?
Well, I just see this as an extension of library music. I mean, when I was doing docs at ABC, they kept lowering. At one point we could do a score and hire musicians and do it all in studios, and then I think we finally got down to, like, for a 1 hour doc, we were getting paid $4,500, and we could knock it out in a week, and with royalties, it would be okay. And then someone came, Pump Audio, I think it was, one of the producers at ABC, got signed on with Pump Audio, said, we'll deliver your hours for $2,000. And so, like, we couldn't compete there. We got blown out of the water,
Yeah.
and that was library. So AI is just going the same way that libraries went.
Well, and that's my point, though. I mean, when does that cross over or splosh over into these other buckets? Because eventually AI will be good enough. I mean, how long ago was it that oh, that brass library sounds like trash. That trumpet is unusable. And now
Well,
people don't mind it.
I have to
Okay.
say how I to justify, I mean, how I saw it. I mean, there's people like Chris who's doing quality docs and he's not getting paid, peanuts for them. And for me, I just thought, okay, well, this is cookie cutter documentaries like, History Channel and Biography that were just was crap anyways.
Right.
That's what they deserve, is that, on
Well, I guess that's my point, though. If the consumer's palate for this has been reduced and reduced and reduced to such a low level that nobody really cares how bad it sounds, and it's just wallpaper set dressing anyway. It's not
Yeah.
something that's featured. It's not something that's upfront. It's just atmospheric ambiance, and that can be produced by the AI engine. What is the viable opportunity for us as composers 10 years from now, 5 years from now?
Though, just to jump in with one thing, which is to say that the part of there's trying to find there's filmmakers that have a higher aesthetic, right? So that's kind of what Peter was talking about. And some of the work that I do with some of the directors I get to work with means that it's all in the power of that transition. How do I go from this thing to that thing? And it's in certain kinds of background music where where it's one thing doing one thing. That you're exactly right. There's the AI is going to take over lots of that for other kinds of projects, but for things that need other kinds of nuance, and particularly with setting the tone early on and doing this bookends and setting and more nuanced transitions. So, but that's all stuff that's going to rely on better prompts and um, better curation of what AI can do, which is to say, there's going to be so much in the middle that is going to put a lot of people out of work. That's the reality of what's going to happen, and yet there's a lot of nuance and gray that happens on the edges of this kind of skill set that you actually need to know enough stuff to be able to tell AI what to do. So I'm not saying there will be some me people who may go the A route for creation. I didn't catch which conference you went to, Scott, but I went to the Guild of Music Supervisors conference last fall, and that was the one where half the panels were about this. And the simple fact is the general guidance for most production companies is they cannot use. You have to sign stuff that says you did not use AI. And so, because it's based
Yes.
on copyrighted information.
Right.
So, and yet there's a bunch of AI companies that are going to get shut down right now. So we're in the Wild West,
Well,
and yet, the more you are on the edges, and the more that you are away from the middle, in my opinion, the more original you are, the more human you are.
right.
That's the only place where
So,
we're going to distinguish ourselves.
so right now, the model for training AI is to dump as many resources as you can in a thing, and it creates an amalgam for its generative stuff. Okay. What the next step would be to have AI that genuinely learns. Okay. And so what if you teach the AI music? These are the rules of music. It's a finite list. We all know this. Okay. Scales work this way, chords work this way, they all interact this way. There's a finite list to this. And when you can program a learning machine to learn those kind of things and then be generative about it, then there is no copyright issue. And this thing can do exactly what you're talking about. And as lovely as I like the idea of, this bell curve, so to speak, like you were talking about, the gray edges. Okay, that's where
Yeah.
there's going to be some more things happening. Okay, fine, we're three derivatives out, right? Um, all the stuff in the middle becomes AI. And then the studio executives who are controlling these edges as well say, why are we paying so much for these edges? No, you don't have the budget for that. We're not going to do that. Put it to
I,
AI.
and the only thing I would add to that is an interesting word that people can look up later, but that may give you some optimism, which is model collapse. So if you take large language model sets, they're all based on stuff, and it keeps on feeding stuff essentially the model starts to collapse because it's not getting new things, which is as the aesthetic of what we needed. So there's having a point of view and having your own aesthetics and knowing what works for something, and there were
Mhm.
always going to be new forms of art that bust for all that. Okay, then that becomes the model. Okay, fine, but somebody had to come up with the thing that was not the thing that's been the thing, and that's still the part that's the same kind of creativity that human beings have been doing for a long time. It's like this is the middle, and I'm not going to do that. I know, and then that becomes the new thing. So, but the idea is that at some point the model is collapsing because essentially it's always bordering on the same stuff and it starts sounding even more like the middle all the time. Um, which that's a bigger can of worms. So
Yeah.
but AI takes over lots of conversations, so that's only appropriate.
Yeah. And I didn't want to hijack our conversation here. It's just, I don't know. And I agree with you. There will always be the need for somebody to write and perform music because I think it's innate to the human condition. And it's just one of those things. It's part of the reason that we're paid so low right now. Okay,
Yeah.
because everybody can produce this stuff in their bedroom. And anybody who has a song in their heart can pick up a guitar and figure out how to make that work a little bit, right? And so, because of the proliferation of music ability or music ability to produce right now, um, yeah, I mean it's not a closed off circuit like it used to be. However, I have to wonder how far into the future before this becomes like the glass blowers you see at a Renaissance fair. Because glassware, I can go to Walmart and get a new 12 pack, and they're all exactly the same and they're all perfect and all this kind of thing. Where glass working used to be a very specialized craft that was only for a certain few, and you had to be on the elite team to even be able to buy a glass cup. Well, now you don't because it's mass produced. Okay. And, but, oh, these guys out at the Renaissance Fair, they're blowing these fancy things. And it's like, oh, it's unique and special and wonderful. How long is it before we're doing that? You know?
I
I
think
think
that's now. I think that's what we're doing now. We've been doing it for 30 years since there was MIDI. Since it's all the same curve. Scott, I don't think this is good news, but it's not new news. It's no different than
Right.
in the 80s. There was a huge number of composers, so-called composers, who were really good at operating computer equipment, but maybe not so great at thinking of notes. And over time, that's sort of filtered out. And it's the same thing that I imagine would happen with AI. I don't know what number of people that leaves working at that point, but it's sort of the same thing. What you were saying about the glass blower, I bet the last couple of glass blowers that still were working, they were the baddest ass glass blowers in the world. There was all the other guys that got kicked out by the Walmart glass machine in China, and this is going to be something like that in some form. Uh, and I think we're already at the part where the guy who knows how to work the engine, that's enough for now. But eventually, it starts to tilt back the other way, where you have to be able to, working the engine is a given, but being able to manipulate it in some creative way is going to add some value. And that's sort of like the direction that Chris North was saying.
I want to just also point out that the way we're characterizing the situation is that the consumers, meaning the film, TV producers, have a lock on the future of everything. And it's important to remember that basically a little while ago, not long ago, there was a thing called record companies, and they had a lock on the future of everything. And they got their asses pretty nicely kicked, so that we now have distribution totally in the hands of people who do no music production whatsoever. All music production is left to individuals or a sliver of the former market when it comes to record company production. Now, the thing that's going to happen as AI and other digital aspects of life pick up further steam is, you could equally ask the question, will there not come a time when AI can generate stories, can generate characters, can create film or streaming media, and that we no longer need those guys with the big cameras and those cigar chewing guys at the big towers. Now, up till now, the bandwidth has given film a huge advantage over music because it's not so easily transportable. DVD encryption, as we may all recall, was broken pretty easily, but it's still much more of a pain in the ass for someone to download a movie than it is to download a song, and that's been helpful for the movie people. But I think this sort of existential question hangs over everything, and I think we should not get too dour in our thoughts because you know we may be at a wake, but we're not the guy in the box yet. So let's enjoy the time we have above ground and hope for the best, because vinyl has made this weird comeback, and it's not like the good old days, but it is something that's happened, and so I think projecting too far out into the future is impractical ultimately.
So
Well, can I
Go
say
ahead.
something? I think basically the thing is that now is the time, especially with Trump on the helm, that composers, musicians, whoever makes music should really speak out. So when you do music, just one line, this is original music, because the public needs to be educated and hear from us that we do original music. The other thing is that many musicians use AI in a really, sometimes really unfair, vicious way. So we musicians are already also very unfair to each other and really counterproductive. So the idea is, how can we people be honest towards making music? As a composer, as a music executionist, like instrumentalist, or people who work for an orchestra, how far can we be honest people? So if it's working out, if it's not working out, it's not just the technology AI. The people who run, who make, who work, use it, it's a problem, you know. And then the politicians, at the end of the day, they just go where the money is. So if we can, it's not a question of, like David said, we should kill the streaming platforms. That's not the problem. It's us, we people, we who make music. So I really loved that Peter mentioned Beethoven, because every time when I'm interviewed, who was the first freelance musician? Usually I would say Beethoven, because every time when he did something, he said it's original and I want to get paid for it. And we are still in a position to do that. I don't know in 10 or 20 years, but now, next year and the year after, we have the power. And if your voice is too small, you have to unite, organize. You don't have to make a association or union. It's enough that even 10 or 20 composers are working together, act collectively, share. Even when some composer can make money, that he has somebody else he can refer to, you know, this is the action which needs to be done. So it's a social democratic problem we have to tackle. And as Peter, I agree, it's not now the time to cry about things. We had the problem with the fax machine, with the first synthesizer. Every time when something new comes out, people are crying because they are coming, they want to stay in their box, you know. So I believe that we can do still more things, you know, together collectively as composers. Even for me as an improvising musician, you know, I have a hard time when I improvise to make my sidemen understand that we are composing music, right? So that's my
So
cup of tea.
so my personal effort to stem the tide is this organization that I mentioned earlier, and it's focused on. And Sohrab, I know you did some performances some years ago with this, right? It's totally focused on demonstrating to the world that music is played by humans. You know, and we do thousands of events every year, and the focus is not on electronic music. It's on people playing music. And sometimes it's on civilians playing shitty music. You know, in other words, it's about them banging on drums together in drum circles and stuff like that, because that's something that isn't challenged by AI. You know, the fine points of production is somewhat of a losing battle over time, which Sohrab, you just ran down. I mean, when I was in high school, or even before that, when there was video cameras, the conventional story of the time, which seems hard to believe, is that this will be the end of movies. Why would we have movies? Because everyone will just have a camera and make their own movie. You know, so it's very hard to sort of know how these things shake out in the end. The one thing I know is that there's some value in people performing music and people improvising music, and that demonstrating that to humanity changes things. So that's my little effort for that.
Okay, right. As talking to Kevin about 68,000 annual income for a composer, I would say it's true, because a composer who has a beautiful wife and one kid actually must make 200 or 300,000 a year at least. and our president of our union makes 125. So 68,000 makes sense to me because me as a musician to make 125 a year is almost impossible. So uh, as if for Christopher North, I mean, it must be tough to be in New York. So the only way really to raise our salaries is really to go on, create original music, make it to really something that speaks out also to the community, right? I don't know about composers, but I know about musicians. They have an advantage, which is if you say something on stage, people hear it. As a composer in a room, writing something out and then give it to a movie or whatever. That's a longer way to get his or her message out. So music needs to have a message, I think. And a message kills even in AI technology. And it can make you also make more money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and as someone, for me, exclusively working with electronic music, that could easily be eventually replaced by AI. I still feel like especially with running a record label for dance music, the types of artists that I work with are also DJs. So they're out there performing, and they need to you got to be able to read a crowd, and being able to sort of mix on the fly. So I don't really see AI. It's going to be more of the generative AI is going to be more of a tool. I don't think it's going to be completely replace the producers in my world, just from what I've been seeing. So there is hope there that I think music is still going to be intended to be consumed by humans. So I think in a live setting, in particular, even when completely everything I do is in the box in the computer, there's no acoustic instruments. I still need to respond to the audience and being able to deliver a product that the audience is going to respond to. So there's that aspect I think is still, still where we're at, and where we can still have, as Joe was mentioning with the Make Music Day, is music is to be experienced by humans, and showing the community to experience that music. So I think in some aspects, like maybe library music or, kind of these background music kind of stuff, filling certain purposes might be, will be replaced by AI. But I think generally speaking, how humans are expressing themselves, I don't think that's going to be going away. So it's a matter of us evolving, I think, as a community as well, and advocating for ourselves as well as what musicians for musicians does.
And it's hard for us generationally, and by us I mean people in my age group on this call here, uh, to speak for younger people and their relationship to culture. But what I'm seeing, almost to a comical extent, is that anyone I encounter from my generation, when I mention music, that's what I've done on my day. It's like the doors open, the big smile comes on. Oh, did you that? There's just a fascination and a love uh, with our generation with the music that was around us, and that would have been rock, jazz, or classical, or all three. Um, and whether that continues to be the case with, say, Taylor Swift's fan base, it's hard for me to say. I'm not really part of her fan base. I'm certainly very glad that someone is being as successful as she is as a singer-songwriter, but she's almost a law unto herself that way. And so there's tremendous sort of market penetration in our generation for all forms of music. Whether that continues to be the case with the next generations, I have no idea. I have no connection to that, but I'll cross my fingers.
I mean, I can imagine. Recently, I've been around a number of super affluent people who, as a hobby or an avocation or whatever, they're songwriters. And some of them have, they're sort of take on a little bit of the quality of the classical era, nobility, because they they have money and they love music and they're funding music and they're funding. They have several people have private recording studios, and their activities are they record outside performers that they like, and they have no goal at all to commercialize it. It's just that's their form of satisfaction. It's very hard to know how stuff evolves down the road. I just noticed that that's kind of a totally different. I don't want to say it's a model, but structure that I'm aware of recently. And there's a guy who's a surgeon. And this is all he does. He has a John Storick designed recording studio in his ginormous mansion. This is I did this the last couple of days, and that's what the guy does. And does that catch on and become the whole universe? I don't know, but that looks a lot more to me like the Viennese court funding Mozart or something. Yeah.
Well, the thing that's a little tragic along those lines is that people like David Koch and even David Geffen, who made his bones in music, have put their money into renaming buildings in Lincoln Center to a tune of really large dollars without any of it going towards actual music. And this is a sort of a lack of imagination to me at an extreme level, and you'd rather be represented by a pile of concrete than you would by something that people will be humming 500 years from now. And so I think the prize goes to whoever can convince one of these oligarchs that being Haydn's patron, being Count Esterhazy, was good business because we still know his name. And damn well that someone will show up with a checkbook in the next 10 to 50 years and rename the buildings they put their names on, as long as they can write a big enough check. So that's something that again, there's a fond hope there. There's an imaginary future there that appeals to me personally. Last thought on AI, as far as what's going to stem the tide of AI. I was recently in a music union related context where we actually had the new political representative of the union, the new lobbyist in essence, available, and discussed what the union's approach to AI is. And it largely seems to be the legislators and the courts will over time create the shape of the future of AI, because no one else really has the juice to do it. And so Scott, in terms of like what will prevent X, Y, or Z from happening, it will be when someone with a valuable property and resources doesn't like what they see going on with some simile of that property being used commercially by someone else, and takes them to court and in essence makes new law. I don't know if I trust legislators to do that on their own, but if there are a few big court cases, maybe we will see some legislation that limit or create parameters under which AI can be slightly less macro destructive than it currently is in a position to be.
Well, I think it's been mentioned a couple of times during this conversation so far. We're rotten to each other, okay, as musicians and composers, and companies that represent musicians and composers. Like you were saying, oh yeah, you can do this for $4,500 for an hour, and you get the residuals too. Nope, we're going to do that for $2,000. what are we doing cutting our own throats just so that we get the gig? Well, everybody has done that, which is why in Denver, which is where I'm located, you still make $100 a night to go play at a bar, which is what you were making in 1983.
Right.
I think
Okay.
that might have been what you were making in 1973 too, but keep
Yeah, it
going.
might be. But this is my point. I mean, there's no cohesion among the people who are making the music. There is no union. There is no representation or muscle or
No,
anybody
there
to
is
say, hey,
unions, Scott. Don't say that. There are associations, there are
for
unions.
composers.
Oh, okay, that's you
Okay,
missed it,
for
right?
composers.
Okay.
There's no muscle for us to say, okay, you know what? Days of Our Lives or Young and the Restless. Yeah, you can have your demand for the 20 to 25 new songs that you need a week, but you're going to pay $500 to $1,000 per needle drop, and you are going to pay the stuff on the back end. There's no more negotiation for the gratis contracts where you get to pay $7 a second for the use of this thing and let BMI pick it up. You know, no, there's none of that. There can't be that in order for us to come back with any kind of strength or unity or that kind of thing. It's not going to happen. And while we're still wanting that kind of force, if that kind of help in the world, we're also still very ready to cut our own throats to get the gig.
Hey, I got to interject this thought. It's not us specifically. With the increase of technology, it's been a double-edged sword. When the internet came on, when Napster happened, LimeWire, digital tools, smart devices,
Hmm?
every advance of technology has been detrimental to us as artists and musicians. We can't escape that. And now AI is now the pinnacle of that manifestation.
Well, I think we should round up now because it's going down the river.
Moving in the wrong way.
I'm sorry, I can't. I honestly, I'm tired of complaining and being too self-critical, and so we have it. We have our music yet. We love each other. We have still possibilities before we die. The problem is actually the younger generation. When I see the younger generation using AI freely and nicely and kindly, and so the thing is just let's continue doing our thing as original with much compassion. Be honest to the audience, to the public, speak out when it's necessary with the right message. And when we have organizations like the Recording Academy or the union, whatever, and you're a member of that organization, speak out. If you don't have an organization, join MFM. It's open for all making music players, regardless race, religion, whatever. And it's going well. We have a very good core of a membership, and the board is very active. As you see, they run even Zoom calls and love to share their knowledge and wisdom. So let's go home now and be positive. And if there's anything, any questions, so I'm always open 24 hours. Email me, call me, or anybody you know from the organization. And we will continue with our Zoom events as usual. And I think thank you very much for joining and all the input you gave. There are many people I don't know. If there's anything you'd like to know more about MFM, just get back to me.
And thanks to Adam, Chris, Peter, Joe, and Keith for handling the responsibility of their respective assignment.
Good.
A pleasure.
Yes, thank you all for your time, talent, and expertise.
Scott, hope to see you soon again.
I hope so too.
Thank you.
Be well.
Okay, bye.
It's all right. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.